Sam Altman, the point guy for OpenAI, on a recent podcast said we are now in the singularity. The singularity, recursive AI, these self-improvement cycles where more the AI gets more and more intelligent, causing an explosive increase in intelligence that culminates in a superintelligence that far exceeds human intelligence and generates unpredictable changes to human civilization. We're there. That's what Sam Altman said on this Relentless podcast. We have a genie that is prepared to grant all our wishes, but what will we wish for? Freedom or chains?
Well, to the previous question, the thing that drives me the most is this is the most interesting, important thing I can imagine doing. And we are now in the singularity. This is the moment. For the last 10 years ago, this was a kind of far off dream at best. It seemed very improbable. And now we're actually in the moment that we used to talk about at the lunch table in a very not serious way. And so the thing that drives me is I've been waiting for this my whole life. And I think it's going to be incredible, hugely positive, awesome for the world. I'm excited to get to work on that. I also think some of the alternative visions painted by other companies are quite terrifying. I'm going to make sure that gets pushed against and is not what happens. But the main thing of what's different than 10 years ago is we're actually in it. This is the real, I think it is both true that it is all one crazy exponential and any one moment is not the tipping point. And also that we are somehow in another one of those decisive periods where the curve can go one way or another, like it was when we started 10 years ago. Are we going to head to a world of AI authoritarianism or liberty? Are we going to decide that because of the very real safety issues and economic issues that, we want one single model to be the machine god or the company associated to do that? Or are we going to say you know what? It may be a little messy, but every time that humanity has traded off its liberty for safety, it's been a long-term net loss. And so we are going to put this in the hands of people. We're going to empower them. We are going to let society express its ideas and use this technology in the way they want. Of course, according to some guardrails, but with a lot of power and potential. And I really care that we do it that way.
I should say the idea that we're in singularity now is not a statement without controversy. There are those who disagree, so I'm not presenting it as a settled opinion by any stretch. And also that argument offered by Altman seems a bit self-contradictory. Well, let's get into it. Partis Marx joins us. He's the author of Hyperscale, The Ambition and Excess of Big Tech's Data Empires. He's also host of the Tech Won't Save Us podcast and writer of the Disconnect newsletter. Partis Marx, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Great to join you.
Well, what's your reaction to what Sam Altman said about where we are?
I do find it kind of funny, to be honest. To me, it sounds like a guy who's, on the one hand, really high on his own supply, right? He says in that clip that this is something that he's been waiting for, that he really wants to believe is happening, and now he's throwing it out like it's here, right? And I think, a lot of people kind of looking at it, and a lot of people who follow this industry would say okay, what is the reason that we've now ticked over to AI singularity? What has really changed in these models? But I think the other piece of this that really stands out to me is that, I think that we're in a moment where he really needs to try to misdirect and distract people, right? Because OpenAI is trying to go public, and it has, had some issues in going public. And we have just kind of come out of this big wave of stories of companies pulling back on their AI spending because they're not seeing the return on investment. And so for me, when I hear Altman doing something like this, it's kind of don't pay attention to all these negative stories about my technology and my company. I have something else to present you to justify, this big IPO and this big kind of valuation that I'm hoping for.
No, that's an interesting point. Well, so, to that end, what is your read on the pullback? You're right about that. And there have been stories the last week about the pullback and AI spend. So how should we understand that in a way perhaps that is more disinterested than Altman's understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a few reasons there, right? Like on the one hand, we have basically had this idea that companies need to be getting in on AI, using AI for the past couple of years. And a lot of companies have jumped on that bandwagon and figured, we need to do this, we need to be investing in it. We can't be left behind by our competitors. But then the other piece of it is a few months ago, there were some changes to the pricing, right? So the way that, say, OpenAI and Microsoft were pricing their AI models, and they switched it over so that, you were basically being charged by the token. This is kind of what the companies refer to as kind of a way to quantify the amount of AI that you're using. And so basically the prices that a lot of companies ended up paying, and companies and individuals, to use these products rose quite sharply, right? And there were a number of companies like Uber, for example, that came out and said that they were just burning through their AI budgets in months rather than the year that the budget was supposed to last for. And that prompted a lot of companies to actually take a look and say, what benefit are we getting from all this spending? Does this really make sense? And that's why we've seen a lot of companies pull back, because they recognize that while they were spending all this money on AI, they weren't necessarily using it in the most productive or efficient ways. They were just using it for the sake of using it, right?
Well, so, going back to Altman's, we're in the singularity. Where do you, if you have an opinion, where do you think we are with it? Because it seems to me what he's saying, and so many of these big tech impresarios say, on the one hand, singularity, super intelligence that comes through this recursive self-improvement loop that we get to. But then at the same time, even though it far exceeds human intelligence and it's going to be autonomous, somehow we're still going to be able to bend AI to our will, and we're still going to have input, and we can make sure that AI operates within some ill-defined sets of guardrails. It seems to me those things are somewhat in contradiction.
Yeah, it definitely does to me as well. There was an interview that Elon Musk did last week with The Economist, where he was kind of talking about, what he was predicting in the next 5 to 10 years. And as far as he was concerned, he said, we were also going to get to this AI singularity sort of a moment, but we were just going to be like the Labrador retrievers, pets to this kind of intelligent AI that would kind of govern our lives, and we would basically lose control over things, right? So he's presenting this in a very different way than what you see Altman saying. But I would say, as far as I see it, I'm skeptical of any of these claims of, AI singularity, right? I think that they're really designed to, basically exaggerate what these technologies do, right? And, we know that they're designed to, say, present text in ways that makes it seem as though you are communicating with something that can think, right? When we know that that is not actually what's happening behind the scenes. And so for me, it's kind of these companies doing a big PR campaign to try to convince people that their tools, that their technologies can do more than they actually do, to thus justify, seeing them in a way that would, justify major valuations and, kind of mass adoption and these sorts of things, in ways that I think that we should still be a bit skeptical that the chatbots, the generative AI is actually going to be as useful as they're claiming, which we see in all these companies kind of pulling back on their spending recently.
So is it more likely, I know you wrote recently about popular apps like the ride-sharing apps, Uber and such, and you may mention in a piece about the food delivery apps too, people think of a DoorDash. So is it more likely when, sort of where the Labrador Retriever will have the appearance of control as AI helps to further appify our lives, if you will, with more tasks than just replacing taxis or replacing, food delivery, the restaurant's food delivery guy. It's going to be more appification of life. Is that possible, at least as the next intermediate step?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible, right? Like, I don't think it's the kind of singularity moment where this like intelligent AI takes over, but I think what it definitely is tech companies, trying to create a product that we are going to become more dependent on, and that allows them to further shape our lives in a way that benefits them, benefits their bottom lines, which, we have seen in many ways from many of the services that we depend on now, services that, if we look back, say, 10 or 15 years ago, were presented to us as, convenient, ability to easily communicate with one another. If you think about social media platforms and things like that. And then, 10, 15 years down the line, we have seen these kind of apps really change in a way that they've become more extractive in order to, extract as much profit as possible. I think many people who would use, say, Facebook today would have a lot of complaints about what that experience is and how much that has changed over the years. And, the same with kind of the ride-hailing apps or the food delivery apps. The costs have gone up not just for users, but we've also seen, say, pay for drivers go down, and kind of the amount that the companies take from restaurants go up. And so there are a lot of issues with how these services act, but they give these companies a lot of power over our lives. And, I think the AI companies are doing something similar, but they're using kind of really, deceptive narratives in order to convince us that they're doing something else, right?
What's your perspective on the data center dialogue, disagreements, discussions? Some argue that basically they're inevitable, or inevitable eyesores, if you will, like telephone poles, like cell towers, like airports, that there's no getting around them. They're our future. In fact, venture capitalist Josh Wolf wrote recently, they're the essential factor in the AI revolution. Scaling data centers, he wrote, and building more computing power is directly correlated with further advances in AI, an effort with immense economic and geopolitical significance for our country. In other words, to get the full benefits, the country has to keep building of the AI revolution. That the country is going to have to keep building more and more and bigger and better data centers. And now you can argue about water usage and private grids versus the public grid and all those things, but in terms of the net, this is going to happen because it needs to happen, even if there are some NIMBY issues to navigate.
Yeah, so I would say I'm really on board with, say, efforts like what we've seen in Newark recently around a moratorium for up to a year on data center construction and kind of approval of new data centers. Yeah, I think, there's no question in my mind that we're going to need a certain amount of data centers, right? And a certain number of them to power the services that we need. But then on the flip side of that, I think the question is, how many do we actually need? What are the acceptable trade-offs to make for an infrastructure like this? And what rules do we need to put in place in order to do this, responsibly, sustainably, those sorts of things, right? And I think that what we see is the tech companies really driving forward to basically try to get past approvals as quickly as possible, to maximize the amount of tax breaks that they can get. And in many cases we see them, try to basically make the data center that would be the least costly to them and to offload many of those costs on the society. We've seen many states see increases in their power bills and things like that because of the demand from data centers. And so the question isn't, should we have data centers or shouldn't we have data centers, but what is the right way to do it? What is the right number of data centers? Where is the right place to locate those? And I think that takes some time to actually come to those answers instead of letting the tech companies try to determine that for us.
Partis Marx is the author of Hyperscale, The Ambition and Excess of Big Tech's Data Empires. He's also host of the Tech Won't Save Us podcast. I hope you can get Sam Altman on. That would be interesting. And he's writer of the Disconnect newsletter. Partis Marx, thanks for joining us. Appreciate your perspective.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you.
And Partis joined us on the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
At Signature Bank, going the distance for business banking customers is what we do every day. We understand that business owners have a